the Marketer of the Day podcast with April Bell, who will be telling us and teaching us about storytelling with heart. Now, April Bell's company is Tree of Life Legacies. They are a storytelling and wisdom-keeping project based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And April also has a really cool iOS app that she will tell us about called StoryCatcher. And April is all about just getting us to find and tell our stories, to explore our core values. And this way it can pay off in all these different ways, right? It pays off in your marketing, in your branding, in your storytelling, in your book writing, in your content. And this whole idea of getting your stories to work for you and using them, it's a really important subject. And April will fill us in. So April, glad to be speaking with you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, Robert. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you too. And so we introduced this idea, we introduced you, but in your own words, what are you focused on, passionate about? What should we really be paying attention to as far as what you do?
Well, in a broad sense, I help people tell personal stories. And the kind of storytelling that I'm really passionate about is values-based storytelling. So, if you have a value, we all do, there's an origin story behind that. And when we can drill down, discern what our core values are, and then find that origin story behind it. So typically, your values are going to be derived from either a learning experience or a mentor. And so then we can find that nugget and then develop it into a story. So then you can share what's really meaningful and important to you in a personal story. So instead of kind of telling people what to do, you can, elegantly state who you are and what you stand for in the way that human beings have been connecting since the dawn of time, which is through a story.
Wonderful. And I think that it took me way too many years to figure this out, that it seemed like there's like different types of speakers, right? And there's the ones that are like only story. And then you're like, well, that entertained me, but it didn't really lead anywhere. And the other extremes seem to be like just the list, the lessons, the commands. And you're like, well, they gave me some good things, but this maybe wasn't really for me. And then there was like some kind of magic in between land where they seemed to have things to say. It led to something. They were good stories, and it seemed like they maybe like found a right fit. And it wasn't all teaching, it wasn't all story, and it was a lot to play with, have fun with, and it was interesting. And it gave me as like a watcher or listener different entry points, right? And I could say, ooh, I can relate to this, or I can relate to that. And then it ended up like helping me out and sticking with me sometimes for years later. And so to help us kind of get this idea, to get us on the same page, like what even is a story to begin with? How do I know if I'm telling a story?
It's actually really easy. Does it have a beginning, a middle, and an end? That's it. I mean, you can expand from there on the whole realm of storycraft, but fundamentally, beginning, middle, and end.
I like it. So have a beginning, middle, and end. And then, but if we were to expand, like, what do you think is important? Because like you said, like there's all these ways to go with it. And it's one of these where you can get too crazy and detailed and specific, right? People say like, oh, well, there needs to be like a villain, or there needs to be some kind of a conflict or resolution. So as far as like taking the beginning, middle, and end, but also making it easy, simple for us, like what does a good story have in it?
Well, ultimately, you want to consider, well, especially in the sense of marketing, right? Is like the question is always, especially with personal storytelling, the story is about you, the story's about me, but I have to think about like, well, what's in it for them? Like that, for me, that's like the fundamental marketing question. And so with whatever story I tell, I can be like, okay, what is it that I want my audience to be left with? What is the point that I'm trying to communicate with this? So then think about that ending, and then I can build my story from there.
That's great. That's helpful. And it seems like I'm kind of drawing like a diagram in my head when you're talking about this, right? Just as far as like, well, there's like analysis paralysis of saying like, oh, well, there's all these stories and what do I use? And you're saying, okay, figure out where you want them to end up and then find a story that gets them there. And so do you have a good example of this? Because you mentioned things like this beginning with the end in mind, and before you mentioned about like the value. So like what is a good example of the storytelling and marketing done right?
So I don't know. I guess I have a story that I tell to, the thing that I help people do the best is to authentically show their heart, be vulnerable, and also be discerning about how they do that in a professional space. So as an example, I have a personal story that I tell, let's see. So in early 2008, I was at an event where an author was talking about his latest book. And as part of his talk, he did this exercise that he called the iceberg. And so in this exercise, what you do is you take the chance to kind of step out and share some personal things about yourself. So 3 times you ask the question, if you really knew me, you'd know, or you pose the question. So in his talk, he was like, well, if you really knew me, you'd know that I'm really excited to be here today telling you all about my book. If you really, really knew me, you'd know that I'm married. My wife and I have a daughter, and we have another one on the way. And we shared that. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, we're here to listen to him talk about his book, and he's sharing something personal. And it kind of caught my attention. And then he said, if you really, really, really knew me, you'd know that I'm actually kind of nervous and scared to be up here today, because what if what I'm saying to you doesn't make any sense, or you're not interested in hearing about my book? And when he did that, I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Like, that was personal, unexpected, and it made me feel much more engaged with him, because he shared something that, like, I would be feeling the exact same way too if I was him. So I ended up hiring him to be my business coach, and we worked together for some time. And in the very beginning, he sent me to some personal growth and development workshops, professional growth and development, to like get to the core of what really mattered to me. And through that work, I discerned that, well, my intention is to be the possibility of love and connection for others, and doing that in a professional and personal space. I mean, this is sort of my own, the torch that I carry for the world and humanity, is that we shouldn't compartmentalize so much who we are. Like, you can be who you really are at work. Just be discerning about it. Anyway, so I create that. A couple of years go by, and I'm at a networking lunch, and I'm going to a networking lunch, and my assignment for that week is to stand in my possibility of, standing for the possibility of love and connection, no matter what. So I arrive to the place. It's this really nice restaurant in downtown where I live. There's white tablecloths. We're sitting out in this beautiful atrium. And as I'm walking in the door, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And so anyway, I get there, we're all sitting down, and the person leading the meeting is like, okay, let's all go around the table and, introduce who we are, and so we can all get to know each other. And the first person goes, and they share their, ideal client, their elevator pitch with their ideal client summary. And one by one, we go through the folks. There's, like a real estate agent, a wealth planner, an interior designer, a web services person, like, the typical cast of characters that you have at these networking lunches. And then there was me. And I realized that when the first person went, because of where I was sitting, that I was going to be last. And so one by one, they all shared their, general script. And as it got closer to me, like the tension was just like increasing and my heart was pounding. And I was like, oh my gosh, am I really going to do this? Or am I just going to kind of chicken out and share my elevator pitch and ideal climate summary? So it got to be my turn. And I said, I'm going to do something a little bit different right now in the way that I share. So, since 2008, I have been helping people find and tell their stories on video. And if you really knew me, you'd know that I'm really passionate about doing that business. And if you really, really knew me, you'd know that what I love about it is the experience that it brings to the people that I get to interview and be with. And if you really, really knew me, you'd know that in my younger days, I didn't always feel listened to or heard. And it's a big gift for me that I'm able to give that to others. And they were all kind of looking at me like, they were interested, and they kind of, seemed to be receptive. And I'm like, well, I'm all in. So I'm going to keep going. And I said, even though I was kind of worried that they thought maybe I was being a little nuts. And then I said, I would like to spend the rest of the time of my allotted time today, instead of talking about my business, I'd like for each of us to go around and each person to share something that's important to you personally or professionally, so we can get to know each other on that way. So then we started going around the table, and to my surprise, I really expected all these people to share something about their business. And to my surprise and my delight, each one shared something very personal about themselves, something they were struggling with, or just something that was going on in their life. And as we got to the third or fourth person, like I noticed, like the wealth planner, his shoulders had started to relax, and he was leaning back in his chair and listening interestedly. The interior designer was like staring off into the distance as she, kind of gathered her thoughts to finish up her share. And then like the real estate agent, was leaning in. And, you could tell by the look on his face, it was like really intently trying to frame a follow-up question to a share that somebody was giving. And like within the space of like 15 minutes, this lunch that had occurred for me, and I would suspect maybe a lot of them, as kind of this, when's this lunch going to be over, like an obligation, had turned into a table of 9 people relaxed and connecting and sharing their humanity with others in a very real way. And I never forgot the way that moment of like when the energy shifted. So if you really knew me, you know that I'm glad that I had the courage to share my true self that day. If you really, really knew me, you know that that's really the thing that inspires me about the people that I, work with and assist in telling their own stories. And if you really, really knew me, you'd know that, sharing my authentic, vulnerable self still terrifies me to this day. But I figure if I keep showing you my heart, you'll be willing to show me yours too.
That's wonderful. That's great. And I was just kind of like thinking about all the, I mean, I was trying to, and also at the same time trying not to, like, pick up on the storytelling elements of that, right? Like you was saying before, showing vulnerability, and also you made it kind. I was like, okay, like, why is this drawing me in, right? Why is this fun versus just like if you had said, hey, here's this technique, right? Here's the really new me technique. You're saying like, well, here's these different like points in time, and here's these different people, and here's like the way the meeting started, and here's how that ended. And so that was really cool to experience just kind of this process, and also feeling some of the joy and the excitement, right? In this networking meeting, the different people kind of coming alive at this better way of doing things versus just like, okay, here are my keywords, right? I'm a wealth planner. Here, let me put my offer out there. Instead, the connection. And I know that you have the story mining workshops and you have the app. And so as far as like finding these really cool stories, like what's the secret? Is it a matter of like making a deliberate effort, or like how do we come up with like this really cool story that you've told that involves like multiple locations, multiple people? How do we find something that's as cool and as interesting and that in our own lives?
Right. So then there's a whole, process and framework. So I published a book last summer called, My Life in Paragraphs, Find and Tell Your Stories. And I've been teaching my story mining process since about 2015. So to help people find that, what's important to me. So, what was important to me in my story is like, one, being authentic, being who I really am, as opposed to putting on my businessy face and, doing an elevator pitch and an ideal client summary. And then also, so then once I'm like, okay, what's important to me? It's connecting with people in a true and genuine way. What are some experiences that I've had in my life where that happened? And then, there's the next level of this, kind of story craft of what order do I put things in? What do I keep? What do I toss? And it's a practice and it's an art. And it's also a lot of fun. And so so then my book and in my workshops, you can practice that process, learn the process, and then find your own stories. And then, on the easier, side is that, start small, start sharing your stories in circles where you feel safe, and heard. And so then that's a big thing that I talk to people about in storytelling is one of the number one skill that you need to be a good storyteller is to be a good listener. So find those people in your life that have that same skill of listening and share your stories with each other. If you're telling stories in a business scenario, find that line where you're able to be as personal as you're comfortable without feeling too vulnerable. But the secret sauce, in my opinion, of telling a good story is being vulnerable. So in business, the key is being discerning about how vulnerable you're able to be without kind of having a negative impact on yourself, or maybe even oversharing in the group. So yeah, the process is in the book. I also teach those workshops virtually and live. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. I think that, and I agree completely how important it is to dig deep and then kind of like refine this and shape it and figure out, well, do I need to add this, remove that, shorten that, lengthen that, and like try out your material. And you're saying that the number one important aspect of this is to show that vulnerability, kind of like in any superhero movie, that someone has some power, but there's also some like really huge flaw in whatever they do, right? The
What's your
Hulk can
kryptonite?
Hulk out, but it can't be controlled, like things
Yeah,
like that, or like Superman as kryptonite, right? And
yeah,
that makes it more fun and relatable, and things going wrong, and you've come so far with the original problem that you had, but maybe the like even like in your case, you're saying, well, you still get nervous, right? You still have the maybe low self-esteem or anxiety, but you still make it work. And then that's relatable times two. So it's fun to think about as far as it's this process, right? And you kind of figure out the raw materials, and then in what order do things go into? Am I oversharing? And then you end up after running it through all this with something that's really cool. And in a way, it takes a lot of the pressure off, doesn't it? Because you're worried about, well, am I using the right sequence of words? And you're saying, well, it's more big picture than that, right? It's
Yes.
about getting attention and sharing this cool story and being personable and having us relate to you. And that way, in a lot of ways, it can be really magic. And so how do people maybe go wrong with this? Because it's easy for like to choose maybe like the wrong story or tell it wrong. So like, is there, we don't have a lot of time left, but
Yeah.
is there like a huge number one mistake in this whole storytelling idea?
Yeah, the mistake is not starting. So the crux of my process and how I approach all of this is like just do one story at a time. So that's why the book's called My Life in Paragraphs. So and the same thing with the app. It's built on just tell one story and then tell another one and another one. So the mistake also is that having this concept that your story doesn't matter. I've heard that so much, like, oh, I don't have any stories to tell. Nobody wants to listen to me. It's so not true. And the thing is that if you start and you allow yourself to start mining those stories, you'll see where the thing that is maybe a random detail to you ends up being a profound gift to someone else.
Yeah, that's great, and that it's about who you're helping, and that like you might think like, well, I'm not changing the world every single time, but there are these moments in time where you have these ahas where something important happened, and like I think when I was a kid, I opened up like the very first chicken soup book, right? And there's been like 200 since then, but like the very original one, I remember just like reading some random story about like some lady with cancer, and I was like, whoa, this like took me on a journey. And I flipped to the next chapter and I read like 3 or 4 in a row, and they were just like everyday people going through some of these same things that we were, but I was
Mm-hmm.
like kind of moved by every single one. And I agree with you that there's, even though like because we're in it and we live in it and we're always a part of it, we don't give ourselves enough credit for what we can share and the people that we can help. And so as far as this app, it sounds really cool, but then there's the initial objection of like, okay, why do I need an app? Why can't I just look up some prompts, record some videos? How does the app help me with the storytelling?
Right. So, yeah, I don't just tell your story. You don't have to use the app. But the cool thing about the app, so the app is created to be a simple tool for people that don't know anything about video editing, nor do they want to. So the nice thing about the app is that I mean, sure, you could just tell your story to your camera roll and be done and share it with people. But if you use StoryCatcher, you can put a title card on it. You can add photos, you can add screen text. And in that way, you have this nice little capsule that you can share with people that's, more well formed. So it's really nice to have photos over that talking head.
Yeah. And we've all seen videos like that, right? Where there's a TikTok or something where there's other things going on, and it makes it flow better. And it just like, I watch a 3 or 5 minute video and it feels like it was 30 seconds just because there was all this extra action happening. And when I felt like my attention was about to go away, oh, there was a cool little word or a cool little photo that dragged me right back. So it's like, it makes it fun and entertaining, and less like learning and less like school and more like we're like watching something cool and fun on TV, but then we get something out of it, right? We get a story, we get some lesson, we get some help, we get some advice. And so you've given us a lot of cool information, a lot of things to think about. And my mind keeps going back to this if you really knew me exercise, and like iterating through like 3 times. that's a really cool, I keep saying the word cool, but it is. It's a nice exercise for us to think about and perform. And so what are some next steps here as far as you have your book, My Life in Paragraphs, you have the StoryCatcher app, you have your website. So if someone says the storytelling idea, I need to take it seriously, I need to apply it, this will really help me get to where I need to go. What's the next step here? What's some call to actions?
Yeah. So, well, first I want to say that the If You Really Knew Me exercise was developed by the folks that founded challengeday.org, an international anti-bullying project that's been going on for 30 years. And how can you connect? So then I'm soon launching a online course for storytelling for leaders, people in business. It's called Your Story Unleashed. So you can go to yourstoryunleashed.com. I'm also available to teach my storytelling workshop for leaders in person or virtually online. All that information is also in my book, My Life in Paragraphs, Find and Tell Your Stories. And then, and then you can just find the StoryCatcher app on the Apple App Store. It's only Apple. Sorry, Android folks. The phones aren't powerful enough to render out the video. So I'm not being a snob about it. We tried. We couldn't make it happen. Anyway, so that's storycatcher.app or just StoryCatcher Pro on the Apple App Store. And inside the app, there's actual prompts to help you tell stories. So if you have a hard time thinking of a topic to speak about, that help is in there too. So yeah, those are some nuggets of how to get the party started. And then, the thing is just, get a story buddy or create a little group, just, some people that you feel comfortable workshopping your stories with, and start small and let it grow from there.
Wonderful. It's the thing that we need to do that will help us. And so what was that web address again? That Your Story Unleashed?
Yes.
Wonderful. And the StoryCatcher app, and just, talking to you about this whole story idea, like what comes to mind here is like, we can have this information and it can be in like different sizes, right? You can tell a story that has like multiple little parts, or you can tell a quick story or a long story, and you can reach people in better ways or reach people that previously were unreachable because you add the emotion and the suspense and the vulnerability and the relatableness. And it's something that we definitely need to look into, check out with the StoryCatcher app and your book, My Life in Paragraphs, Find and Tell Your Stories, so that way we can figure out these core values, we can workshop our messaging, communicating, and we can have that really amazing keynote speech or YouTube video or podcast presentation, social media content, whatever it is, and reach people and make an impact and like really stand out. And so that way you can avoid being the person that says, hey, I'm a wealth planner, I'm a real estate developer. You can say, hey, like, wouldn't you like to build your dream home, or wouldn't you like to go on any vacation? That's way more exciting than, hey, here's my job title. So we need to check these things out. aprilbell.com, StoryCatcher app, and yourstoryunleashed.com. Is there, as we're wrapping up, winding down our conversation here, April, I like to end by asking my guest about a fun quote or lesson that can really help us and give us a nice soundbite. It's my way of maybe stumping you a little bit, but what comes to mind as far as a fun quote or lesson to wrap things up?
One of my heroes is Derek Sivers. He invented CD Baby. And he wrote a book in 2011, I think, Anything You Want. It's fantastic. I recommend anybody read it. But anyway, one of the quotes that he has that I just, really resonates is, obvious to you, amazing to others. So like this whole thing with storytelling and sharing your wisdom, the thing that seems obvious to you, it's going to be amazing to others. You don't have to overthink it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You have all you need inside of you already. It's just getting that help and support to let that come out and shine a light on it in a way that makes you proud and comfortable in having done that.
That is amazing, and that's a great concept. Simple to you, but helpful to others. And CD Baby, that takes me back because I knew a guy who was a musician, and iTunes was still kind of new, and he said, "Hey, I don't know anything about iTunes, but if you publish on CD Baby, then your music album will get on iTunes." So there's the perfect example of, hey, you just go here, you make these clicks, simple for him, but then that could have gotten people on iTunes who otherwise wouldn't even know how to get on there. So
Yeah.
so there we go. Simple for you, but exciting and helpful for others.
Yeah.
April Bell, Storytelling with Heart. Wonderful speaking with you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.